Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar. This time we'll be talking about variance because we thought that's a very important topic for you all. I am Peter Schmidt. You probably know me from other webinars that I held for AX Semantics in the past. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. I want to tell you what we understand under the term variance in our platform. What is variance, and what do you need variance for? Why should you put variance in the texts that you produce with us? I'll be going to show you what how to introduce the variance. What tools does our platform give you to introduce variance into your texts? And the last and probably the longest point will be I will show you how you do that, how to implement that in the platform, what I told you today. Let's start right away. What is variance? I found the definition of variance sometimes a bit wobbly. So I think I had to come up with with my own. I find variance to be texts are variant when they differ in either choice of words, the train of thought, the optical appearance between the texts, or the text's message. Not every point of these four is equal. I think the optical appearance is not as much important as the message, for example, and the train of thought is a bit abstract. But when you combine 2 or 3 of those points in your complete portfolio of texts, I think you can achieve a pretty good variance over all your texts. And what do you need them for? There are 2 recipients that react differently to variant texts. Most of us should know the SEO effects of variant texts. So the way Google or other search engines react to variant texts on your web page, or in fact, the reaction is more clear if you don't vary the texts on your text. When everything is the same, you can have you can get problems there. But also human readers see or notice the variance between texts. We'll come to that. First, let's talk about the SEO part. Duplicate content is bad. This standpoint has been true for a long time and still is, for 2 reasons. First, variant texts usually show a search engine that you have taken the time to care about each of those texts. When there's no repetition, which is the second point actually. When there's no repetition throughout all your texts, Google and the others think that you invested time in those texts, and that it's probably a more important and more relevant content. The relevance also, Google even notices that you modified the optical appearance of texts. For example, if you start or if you include some tables or bullet points and all that stuff into a text, it will appear much more relevant than if you only put in there one form of the text, like running text, or and you have to vary these combinations of the certain kinds of texts. And also the readers like relevance. Human readers often only read the first few sentences or the first paragraph of the text you give them. So if they don't repeat through all of your texts, that's a pretty good thing for for your human audience, not just for your robot audience. There's also a penalty for repetition. When a human reader notices that all of your texts are the same, they usually also think that your product is in some way inferior, because the missing effort for the text reflects for the product, and usually the text trust that you can create is also one-to-one a product trust you create with the text you're writing. So make sure you are producing variant texts for those reasons. Also, for human readers, the presentation is important. I said the first, usually human readers will only read the first few sentences of the texts you are writing, because in fact, usually humans are lazy. In that part, usually humans want to see the pictures. They want to have the feature tables and all that stuff. But the text can be a catching point, really, of the site, of the product page, when you can create a mood that that makes the human to stay on your page and read it. And if the person reads the third or the second or the third texts for an equal product, if they all start the same, the human usually thinks, okay, they're all the same, not worth my time. So start your text differently, and be sure to modify and vary those few lines the most often. Also, part of the presentation is how are these texts presented. For example, a product page for one of your products is only showing one text. That's okay. You can't have variants inside one text. But the second you start showing several snippets of text next to each other, for example, the first 3 lines or the first sentence of a product description is listed on an overview page, you should also really focus on making those few lines very unique between each other. Also, for the whole text, even though inside one text there can't logically be variants, but I can show you techniques today how you can make this this text more scannable for the human reader. It's part of our mechanisms that we can use for variants. We can also make those parts. We can also make the text more readable. I can show you how later. Okay, what tools can I offer you in our platform to introduce variants to your texts? There are practically 2 kinds of tools or 2 kinds of variants that I can introduce into a text with our machine. The first kind is the data-driven or relevance-based variants, which would be logical decisions and derivations from the data and evaluations from the data that you give the machine. And the second part is pure randomness, where you give the machine several options to say the same, and the machine combines it. Randomness usually is a bit easier to achieve in our machine because you can just think of it and type it in practically. The data-driven relevance is more complicated, but there's also more to gain from it, because the data-driven relevance appears when you evaluate and cluster the data you have. For example, screen sizes, what is a large screen, what is a small screen. You have to make up these thresholds and evaluations, and you have to make a statement what the evaluation in a cluster means. For example, a large display is made for watching movies or playing games. A small display usually means that you can put a mobile phone into your pocket. Yeah? What does the data value mean for the reader? So it's more it needs more work, but it's way better to do this work than just to put in more variants of a sentence, because once you have done the analysis for the data-driven part, it pretty much works on its own. Whereas when you want to expand the randomness, you will have to do it by hand every time. Now, what tools do we have for these two kinds of variance methods? Let's start with the data-driven and the relevance one, because I think it's the most important. You can select several stories by looking into your data and see what is appropriate. You could imagine several, for example, several product categories being texted in the same configuration in our platform, and the machine has rules on what kind of category it is. For example, you could put tablets, mobile phones, and smartphones in one cluster, which talks about phones and multimedia stuff in general, and another story that has completely different content. For example, the running shoe that's also in your product range. Stories are a collection of statements, as you might know. Statements are our representation of first sentences, the sentences our machine can say, and you can switch off sentences and you can switch on other sentences, also depending on evaluations that you did on the data. I'll show you that later, and you also learned that in our basic courses for our platform. When you are deciding when to include a sentence into a text, you're pretty much doing this. And the phrases are pretty much words that we put into the text that may come from the data directly. For example, the name of the product you are talking about would be one such phrase, but it can also be something more complicated. For example, the evaluation or the tip you give your reader about the value of a data field. For example, if the screen size is large, that this phone is usable for watching movies and playing games, that would be a phrase in that sense. And I can give some variance through lists. Listing stuff can be done in several formats, for example. You could do bullet points, you could do ordered lists, you can write them as rolling text, you could write a sentence that does 50-50, for example. Feature X and Y are only two of the best features of this product. The best other ones are A, B, and C. And A, B, and C would be bullet points. And when you switch around these 3 or 4 formats that we have, the texts are very variant optically, but also for the search engines, because we have real grammar in there and we have bullet points in there which they like. The random part, or the randomness I can introduce into training, pretty much uses the same elements in our trainings, but you would use it differently. For example, you can do several stories for the same product type. You could do 2 stories for smartphones and just rotate the statements around in them, or in one story you concentrate on the memory. For example, in one story you concentrate on the multimedia functions of the mobile phone, and you can choose that by random for each telephone. Then inside the statements you can add branches. I'll show you that. And the branches is that what the older users of you will recognize as the statement variants. Each statement can have several ways to be said, and in the branches you can introduce these several ways to say stuff. Branches can also be used for the for synonymization, which is also a randomized function. So you could switch out certain words or certain phrases inside of statements and bring in randomness, random variance there. Which brings us to phrases. Phrases are, again, stuff that comes from data, but also when you put in your text an evaluated phrase like it's good for watching movies, you can also say those in several ways and include those one of those at random. The last point is the markup. What is markup? You can make text bold, you can introduce headlines, you can italicize texts in our machine. You can do how it's called, paragraphs with our machine, and that can those elements can also be switched on and off with triggers, and for that and those triggers can be random, so you can add emphasizing at random throughout your text. You predefine the places where that would happen, so the machine doesn't guess that, but you can switch it off at random. I'll show you all of that pretty much right now. Yeah, let's go to the tool. I prepared a training. It's about mobile phones. We all know this training already, or this kind of training. I prepared a few sentences or statements, actually. Each of these has exactly one variant. You see, there's absolutely no variance in there. This is a static text right now. Let's check that. I'll go to review and create a few. Yeah, Samsung Note 16 GB. Blah, blah, blah. The smartphone Galaxy Note 4 from Samsung is equipped with the operating system Android. And when I regenerate that, it's completely the same. Now let's fill that with some more variants. First, I'll show you the methods that I can use for adding random variants, because these are actually the easier ones. And after that, I'll show you the evaluated ways where I look into the data to do to add more variants. Okay, first let's do the headline. I'll switch this to the headline. This is actually the first way to add markup into our text. So now I switched on a headline, and I can change the wording of this headline by just introducing more variants of it. I will do that with branches. Let's see how that works. I'm marking all the text I want to switch out, and then click on Create Branching. And when I created that branch, I can just paste a new text here. Yeah. Galaxy Note 4 by Samsung with 16 GB memory capacity, which says exactly the same thing as this one, but in another way. And I have a third one. Okay, Galaxy Note 4 by Samsung. So even omission is a way to create variants. Okay, let's see what that does. When I create a text for this mobile phone, you see it shows the long version this time. Let's recreate. Now it's the short one, and you see it's for the same data set. I have two different headlines already, and this was the original one. And every time I create a new text for this phone, I will get a new headline, one of those three variants. this is the most basic way to introduce variance into our system. Just say the same thing in different ways. This way is also already pretty popular, and I think the most of you already seen that. Now, why is that such a cool feature? Because the machine always draws for each statement separately. So when I add variance for the other statements, I will get a recombination of 1, 2, 3, 4 die throws. Okay, so we have already 3 to the power of 4 different versions of the same text. Let's do that, and I'll show you. I will add branches for all of them. 3 each time. Okay, the next one is about the name. I will tell the name, the category of the device, and the brand and its operating system. Now watch the sequence of these parameters. It's category, name, brand, and the operating system. And here I switch it around. It's operating system, category, name, and brand. And these 3 ways to say things are pretty easy to achieve because you can just switch around the parts of the sentence. If you want to have more, usually it gets a bit more complicated, but the number of variants you could put in here are pretty much only limited by your fantasy. Only one thing to watch out for, though, please make sure that you use the same data fields and say the same stuff in here, and in here. Because these 3 actually really get changed out at random. And if you forget one value, for example, in one of them, there will be text where the value will be missing. Okay, so small precaution, but it's actually pretty straightforward what these branches do. Let's do them for the others. Do that for the weight. And again. And for the color. And again. Okay. Now I have 4 sentences or 4 statements with 3 variants, 3 branches each. Now let's see what that does to our text. Okay. The headline, Galaxy Note 4 by Samsung with 16 GB memory capacity. The smartphone Galaxy Note 4 from Samsung is equipped with the operating system Android. The rather small device weighs 176 grams. Its black color gives it a classic look. Okay, let's regenerate. Headline is the same. This is also the same, but the sentence only 3 inches small. It weighs 176 grams. That's different. And its classic appearance is dominated by its black color. That's also different than before. And you see, I don't even use the data in my texts in my texts yet, and I already have achieved a pretty good variance when I click on regenerate. Okay, and that's actually the very first way to add variance to our text. Okay, what else can we do? I told you about the stories. For example, stories are the sequence of the statements. You can control the sequence of the statements, how they appear in the final text. So let's do a second one. This can be done in narrate. Let's look at the first one to show you how it looks. Each story has a name. It has a trigger. This one trigger is always true, so it can always be used by the system. Should you decide that that shouldn't be the case, you can deactivate the always trigger and select a trigger variable that you would create in transform and switch on or off a story. That's what I'm going to show you later with the categories. But for now, let's just continue with the auto trigger. And then at the bottom, you see the used statements. These statements are the 4 statements I created in here. Let's give the names so it's more clear. This one is headline. This one is the intro. This one is weight and size. And this one, the last one, is the color. Okay. Now, in this statement, you see we have first is the headline, of course. Then we have the intro. Then we have weight and size. And then we have color. Now I can add another story. Let's call it story 2. I'll switch on the auto trigger. And now you see used statements. The part used statements is empty. I can now select from all the other statements that are somewhere in my configuration. I can select them. This time I'll do another sequence. I'll do headline first, then the intro. That has to be the case. Not every sentence can be switched around because imagine I would put the intro in front of the headline. That would just look stupid. So some are fixed, but some we can switch around. For example, weight size and color. For this one, I'll put color in front of weight size. And now we can check and review again what will happen. So we have weight size in the last place and the color in the middle. Let's do that again. And it's back to the first story. Color is in the back and the weight size is in the middle. And like this, you pretty much doubled the variance because all of these, both stories use all of the branches inside the separate statements that are used. Okay, this was the second part of the randomness. These were the stories. Now let's go to the third part. I can add phrases. Phrases in the random way would be what some of you already know as synonyms, which can also be done with these branches inside of these inside of these statements. I can add some synonyms to the sentences in here to show you. For example, this one, the smartphone Galaxy Note 4 from Samsung is equipped with the operating system Android, is equipped with, can be exchanged for, comes. So the smartphone Galaxy Note 4 from Samsung is equipped with the operating system Android, or the smartphone Galaxy Note 4 from Samsung comes with the operating system Android. We usually recommend you do 2 of these synonyms with several values in each of these major branches, and so that you can pretty much quadruple the number of actual statement variance that you get out of these. Let's continue for this one. In here, for example, I can even do 3. I can do built, made, or manufactured. Okay. And now I have actually 4 versions of this branch. No, three versions of this branch alone. So I have 3 here, 4, 5, 6. I have already 6 ways to say this thing. And this gets more and more the more branches you add in here. Let's do that for the others. I have a synonym prepared for ways. Has a weight of, and in here I can do 2 of those. Is of display. Of its display, I can say thanks to the 5 inches display size versus, and thanks to the 5 inches of its display. So now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 different variants of this one branch alone. Okay, you see how that would make up 12 if I did that to all of those 3. Sometimes it's not possible, as you see in these sentences here. Sometimes only one of those is possible at all. I would recommend you to err on the side of the text quality. So don't push 2 of those synonymizations in every branch with force. If it doesn't work and remains a good English or good text, just leave it out. Quality is more relevant. Quality is more important than variance. Okay. Also here, I can do has a weight of. Now we see a small caveat in here. For example, here this weighs and has a weight of, weighs has a weight of. Now, of course, it's possible that this has a weight of and weighs. They are more often in the texts than these and these would be, because they have the same options to choose from. So if you can make sure that you plan the synonyms ahead so that you don't use the same here as you will use here. Okay, so spread them by hand. You can help the variants that way by planning them wisely. Okay. Okay, I haven't prepared some for the color. Okay, so what does it do? It pretty much does the same thing as I showed you for these branches. When we go to the review, it has a weight of 176 grams, and when we regenerate, we have it weighs 176 grams. And you see, I will be I will click this regenerate button pretty often if I want to see the same variant with the same synonyms again. And that's pretty much what we want, because this means we have a lot of variants before there are 2 equal ones. Now for the last way to show you or to introduce random variants would be to introduce the markups. So we go back here, and in here I can add emphasis symbols. I can also do that with these branches. I could do it with triggering and all that stuff, but that's not necessary. Right now, you can do that with the branches. For example, let's say we want to emphasize the smartphone a bit. We can do that with the also with the branches. I will just add these asterisks in one branch and leave them out in another. And I will do that for all the appearances of smartphone. Okay. Smartphone branching. Okay, it works like synonyms in this case. Okay, smartphone, and we should see a the switch between smartphone emphasized and smartphone standard when we go back to review. Okay, here, smartphone, not emphasized. Again, not emphasized. Can take a while to see it. Ah, here it is. This is italic now. Okay, and we can actually push that a bit further. We have several types of emphasizing text. You might know them, making text bold or italic, and you can also alternate between them. It's just a matter of adding the adequate symbols. So now it's fat or bold. And it's called fat. Okay, so these were the ways to introduce random variance into your training. And as you see, I never even touched the data fields. So this is everything achievable just by thinking hard and entering it into our machine. Now let's do some variance inside the in a logic way. Let's first start with the stories again. I want to show you how to write the triggers to switch the stories around. I want to create a new story, which I would just call not a smartphone. And now I will create a trigger that switches on the story 1 and 2 if it's a smartphone, and I will create a trigger that will switch this one on if the category is not a smartphone. I start by going to the Analyze tab in our system. I'll find the category because in there I have, surprise, the category. It's 3 times smartphones in my data. And I will add the node to the transformer here. And here is the traditional firefighter siren. Okay. I added the data input in here. You see this one, this iPhone 7 doesn't have this data field filled. You can check that. The iPhone category. Okay, don't see this is. Let's try again. Okay, it's string. It's category. And this should be true. Ah, okay. It was my fault, not the system. My test object I selected is in German, and here it's called Kategorie. I have to add a English test object, and then it will work. Okay, now the other iPhone, and I see it's smartphone. Okay, so now I created the data nodes to access the data field of the category, and now I can check if certain stuff is in this category. This is done by a condition node. I will add a parameter connected to the input, and now on this param1 I can check what is in there. For example, I can check if param1 equals smartphone, which is true. Let's name that condition smartphone. I can do the counter test for that. Another condition. Add parameter. Param1 is not equal to smartphone. Connected to the input. Okay. Let's give it a name. And no smartphone. You see, as the object is a smartphone, const smartphone is true, and const no smartphone is false. Let's select this German data set so I can show you it switches around. Once it's empty, or it would empty is also not smartphone. So the smartphone one is false, and the no smartphone one is true. Let's switch back. Now I can add a trigger or an output variable to those conditions, and then I can use them in the writer part. Add them. Some of you might notice that this is different from the phrase variables, group variables, and trigger variables we previously had. That's actually a new feature we launched 1 or 2 weeks ago. And you can now attach one of these things to all kinds of nodes in the transform, and use the node's value directly. You don't need to attach a phrase or a group or a trigger behind everyone or everything. Let's give them names too. And name this is smartphone. This one is no smartphone. And now I can select these in my story. I go back to narrate, click on the story, deactivate the auto trigger, and select is smartphone. This one also is smartphone, and the not smartphone story has no statements yet. We will change that in a second. And this one will be triggered if it is no smartphone. Now let's put a sentence in there. Not a smartphone. You see it's empty. Let's add something like, this is not a smartphone. And let's try what's happening. Remember the iPhone 7 I checked earlier with is the is the German one. It's Kategorie, so the trigger is false. It's no smartphone. The output is this is not a smartphone. But when I use the iPhone 7, that is English with category, it outputs the text. Okay, this text now reacts to the trigger I wrote. And the special thing is this trigger or these two stories, they still get chosen at random, because now I have two stories with a true trigger. These two get, or one of these two stories get chosen at random. Okay. Now, I can do that same thing with a camera, for example. When we look at the data sources, not all of them have a camera. You see features, LTE, WLAN, Bluetooth, LTE, WLAN, Bluetooth, and here the camera megapixel is here. Here is 5. Here it's 12. Okay, here it's also 12. Okay, so they all have them, but I can write a statement and trigger it also. If this data field is empty, I can switch off a statement about camera. That's also not difficult. I'll just add it here. Add its text. Also in several variants, as we're used to. Always do that, and the text will get pretty variant pretty fast. Yeah. Now, when you see the statement, you're certainly asking, where do I put this trigger? You can expand the menu for each of these statements with this button. And then when you hover over the name, you see the pen, which brings you to narrate to the statement. It's called camera. And in here, we also have a trigger. I can select both of these, one of these triggers, and I could create in the same way as I did with these with the category. I can put in the I can switch this statement on or off. Okay. The last part that I wanted to show you is a phrase, which we'll put in depending on what a value of a data field is, which is not the value of the data field itself. So putting the name and the memory size and the manufacturer in here with the containers, that's pretty basic, and you all should know how to do that. But if you want to expand the evaluation or the enrichment of the data, the texts according to the data, you can pretty much translate the values that come with the data sets to new values of for your mobile that appear in the text. I'll show you that in an example. Here I want to translate the color, which is black in some cases for the mobile phone, or I have one gold mobile phone. I want to translate that to new words that appear here. Okay, so let's do that. First, I have to write a little translation system for that. Let's go back in here, because as an input we need the color. You see, we have 2 times the mobile phones are black, 1 times it's gold. Let's add that color, create. Okay, here it is, gold. And now I can add what the programmers amongst you will recognize as a switch. We call it a decision. When I connect this in here, I can add so-called cases, which means this switch checks if the text that comes out of this one is the thing I will put in here, for example, gold or black or red or yellow, as much as you need. And it compares this value with those and switches to true the output which is associated with this gold one, for example. When I select the other test object, the value is black and the second one would be true. So let's put, so let's put outputs for those two colors there. Let's do two phrases, phrase 1, phrase 2. And I connect them with the yellow ports because it's only a yes/no value that's coming out from here. Let's give this a name first. It's called the phrase black, no, gold. How should we call it? Let's call it noble. And black is phrase black. This one is classic. Okay. Then I have to recombine them so I can put them in the same spot in a group and mark it as an output. You see like this. The phrase variable won't be, or the phrase node isn't found in the writer anymore. You have to add this variable. So it's enough if I rename this. It's var color phrase like this. And now I can go to my sentence in the writer. You see I have var color phrase and I can add it here as a container. Classic. Let's do that for the color too. And again, the phrase here and black in here. Okay, you see, it's black. Mark the wrong thing. Its gold color gives it a noble look. Its noble appearance is dominated by its gold color. If I switch back to the S7, its classic appearance is dominated by its black color. Its black color gives it a classic look. That's how you do an evaluation in our system, which gives you a prepared set of variants, but a huge amount of relevance because you are really describing the item you are texting about. Okay, these are the features that I wanted to show you to create some variance in your texts. I'm, of course, now open to questions, as always. In the Zoom software, you find a button, either F&A or Q&A, depending on which language you use. Please state your questions there, and I'll try to answer them as good as I can. The first question is, how can I change the weight of the randomness of stories? Usually the weight for each story is the same, so they are spread equal. If you wish to do different weights for the stories, you would have to create the trigger yourself. This can be done in the transform. you would have to create a random number generator. We can do that with a mapping. We have the function rnd int, and the left and the right boundary. So for example, for this throw, this would be a normal die, and this throw would have been 4. And now, for example, if you would want to do a what is it? Now it's 1 to 10. Not good at calculating in my head. So if you would want to have a 60-40 spread, you could do it like this with a condition. Add a parameter, read the number, and then just check if param 1 is greater 6, and then 7, 8, 9, and 10 will make the trigger true, and the other way around, param 1 smaller than 6. Be sure to make one of them absolute greater and the other one less than and or equal, or else the 6 would be left out. And when we re-evaluate that, the throws would get that this numeric spread. I can't force it to redo the throw, so you have to trust me. With this configuration, this one would be true in 40% of the time, and this one would be true in 60% of the throws, of the text generations, actually. If you want to have more than one of these triggers, make sure to use the same random number generator and not use 2 separate ones, because they would be independent. Okay. Any more questions? How can I add sticky text label like introduction or overview of the product? A sticky text label like introduction or overview. These are called sentence names. And when you are in the right view, you can open with this button. You can open these menus and then click on the pen. And in here you can add the names. Thank you again for listening to me, for bearing with me. I hope I'll see you again in one of our later webinars. If someone of you is interested, I have the same webinar about variance in German next week, so you can see all of this again if you are interested again. If not, we are always happy to hear feedback. I personally want to know how you did find my webinar, and if you have any more questions, feel free to ask in our chat rooms, in our ticket system. Write me personally. You know how to reach us. So thank you and bye-bye.